Friends, thanks for joining us again. Today we're going to have a look at Mark chapter 6, verses 30 all the way to 56. So we're looking at the second half of Mark chapter 6. So open up your Bibles if you have a Bible and follow along, or listen as I read the Bible for us in English. Now the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and that they had taught. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a remote place and rest for a while." For many people were coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they went away in the boat by themselves to a remote place. But many saw them leaving and recognized them. People ran there by land from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. So as he stepped ashore, he saw a huge crowd and had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Then he began to teach them many things. When it was already late, his disciples approached him and said, "This place is a wilderness, and it is already late. Send them away so they can go to the countryside and villages to buy something to eat." "You give them something to eat," Jesus said. They said to him, "Should we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" He asked them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and have a look." When they found, they said, "We have 5 and 2 fish." Then he instructed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. Then he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke the loaves. He kept giving them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. Everyone ate and was filled. Then they picked up 12 baskets full of bread and fish. Now those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After he said goodbye to them, he went away to the mountain to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. He saw them being battered as they rowed because the wind was against them. And around 3 in the morning he came toward them walking on the sea, and he wanted to pass by them. When they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and they cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke with them and said, "Have courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped. They were completely astounded because they had not understood about the loaves. Instead, their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and beached the boat. As they got out of the boat, people immediately recognized Jesus. They hurried throughout that vicinity and began to carry sick on mats to wherever they heard that he was. Wherever he would go, into the villages or the towns or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplaces, and they begged him that they might touch the tassel of his robe. And everyone who touched it was made well. Now, friends, this second half of Mark chapter 6 is actually connected to the first half of Mark chapter 6. And the two things that we learn about who Jesus is, about whether Jesus is the Son of God or not, we learn first by remembering what happened last time. Remember last time, Mark teaches us about how King Herod killed John the Baptist. We learn about King Herod being a bad king, a leader who was not in control of himself, and so did things that hurt his people. He didn't want to, but because of his lack of control, he made promises that he had to keep, even though they were bad. This time we see that Jesus starts by worrying, caring about his disciples because they needed to rest. They had been doing much work telling people the gospel. And they went to another place to rest, but other people found out and they came rushing, and they got to the place before Jesus and his disciples got there. And instead of being angry or trying to go to another place, Jesus gets out, sees all the people who are waiting for him, and he says that he has compassion on them. Mark says that he loved them, he had compassion on them, and he gives the reason. He says because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Now this is a very interesting line, and it comes from the Old Testament. It comes from the prophet Ezekiel, who talks about the truth that the people of God are like sheep who don't have a good leader to help them and to care for them and to protect them. And Jesus, he sees the people and he sees them like sheep without a shepherd. And I think what Mark is trying to say is that Jesus is the shepherd who will be able to really, actually care for the people, care for the sheep. And so Jesus teaches them for a long time. In fact, so long that it's almost night and people are they haven't had anything to eat. And so the disciples ask them to all go because it would be really expensive to feed everybody. But Jesus says, no, we can feed them. And so Jesus actually asked them to find how much food is around. And they find 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And Jesus breaks the bread and prays to God and then starts handing out the fish and the bread to all the people who are sitting on the grass. And he keeps handing out and handing out and handing out. And in the end, he feeds 5,000 men. Most likely that means 5,000 men plus women and children with them. And so that means he feeds more than 5,000 people. And after he finishes, there are 12 baskets full of bread left over. There is food left over. And we see that Jesus is powerful, so powerful that he can feed so many people, more than 5,000 people, with just 5 pieces of bread and 2 fish. And it is a miracle. But he's not just a powerful man, he's a powerful man who is a good leader who loves the people. He loves his disciples and wants to care for them. He loves the people and sees himself as the shepherd for them, the leader who is going to help them and care for them and protect them. And what we learn after that is that is what Mark thinks the idea of the feeding 5,000 really is about. You see, Mark thinks that if you understand the feeding of the 5,000, you understand that Jesus is divine. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is the one who is powerful to do these miracles. Jesus is the one who has the power and authority of God to actually care and protect his people. He is the person that Ezekiel was talking about. He's the person who would be the shepherd for the sheep, because all the leaders of Israel were not good shepherds of the sheep. Now, how we know this is, there's this scene where Jesus walks on water. The disciples go ahead of him on a boat, they're going to the other side. Jesus prays, and then he starts walking towards them, and he walks on the sea, he walks on the water. And the disciples, they are so scared, they say, oh no, it's a ghost. And they are freaked out and they are terrified. And Jesus speaks with them and says, no, don't be afraid. Have courage. It's me. It's Jesus. And he gets into the boat and all the storms stop. And the disciples, they are astounded. And Mark gives us a good clue. He says they are astounded because they do not understand about the loaves and their hearts were hardened. And what Mark is saying is, the disciples, they should know, after seeing the miracle of Jesus feeding the 5,000, they should know that Jesus is divine. Jesus has God's power. Jesus is the Son of God, because only the Son of God can do these things. Not only is it about walking on water, which if Jesus really is the Son of God with the power of God, then that shouldn't be surprising. He can do anything. But it's because they are not seeing what is right in front of them. It's because their heart is hardened. It means they are not letting themselves see the truth about who Jesus is. And this is important as a challenge for us. You see, we need to ask the question, are our hearts hardened? Can we see, as we read Mark's Gospel, all the proof we need that Jesus is the Son of God? Jesus has the authority and power of God. but we just don't want to listen. Because if we see it, it means that we need to then turn, say sorry to God, and start following Jesus, start following God. If we know that Jesus really is the Son of God, then we know that Jesus has the power to save us from our sin. We are all people who sin. We are all people who fall short of God's perfect standard. And we need Jesus. And if you are seeing that Jesus is the Son of God, who has the authority of God to forgive sins, the only one who has that sort of power to feed 5,000, to calm the storms, to heal the sick, to even raise the little girl from death, if you are seeing this Jesus, then surely what you must do is turn and follow him.